Hi everyone, I'm back with another video, Vedic birth chart analysis of a lottery winner. And I love doing these, and I plan on doing some more in the future. So just jumping right in, this person, her name was Rosemarie Bowser, and she had won $13 million back in December 1984. And first, as always, I'm going to talk about the static potential that I see in her chart that alludes to a lottery win, or at least gaining good money, in the potential for gaining good wealth in her birth chart. So right away, I see that Mars is her first lord, and it happens to be in the 8th house. And this is a very much classic example of your identity, someone's identity getting connected to a lottery win, because the first lord has to do with essentially our, like I said, identity, our path in life. And so this having the first lord in the 8th house can definitely connect you to a lottery win. Now, the other thing I see here is that she happens to have Sun, Venus, and Mercury all in the nakshatra Purva Falguni. And Purva Falguni is very much associated with great wealth because it is ruled by Venus, and it symbolizes a hammock, and so it's indicative of relaxation, comfort, and enjoyment in life. And so it definitely alludes to wealth and prosperity. And like I said, the planetary ruler is Venus. And so again, indicates beauty, luxury, and pleasure in life. Now, let's see here. So that was the other big thing. Now, if you look, Mercury happens to be the 8th lord and 11th lord, and again, it's in Purva Falguni, and this is, indicative of, well, this is a good thing just because, again, 8th lord has to do with the lottery, 11th lord is large gains, and so having these in Purva Falguni, I think, kind of indicates a hint here, and I've noticed that here the 6th lord is in the 8th house, and this creates a Vipreet Raja Yoga, which is usually indicative of success after adversities. So I noticed that could be prominent in lottery wins as well, this combination. And so she has that here. And there happens to be, this is just interesting to note, that there happens to be malefic hemming around the 8th house. Rahu and Saturn are hemming the 8th house, which you would think that would be a negative thing. Again, 8th house has to do with other people's resources and lottery wins. But again, I just think it's worth mentioning, because if you do have malefic hemming, it may not necessarily be a bad thing. Now, I always like to look at the potential from the moon chart as well. And you know what? Let's see. Let me just mention one more thing about this chart here. It's actually, I was going to mention it in the moon chart, but look at her Sun and Venus. It is exactly 19 degrees. Okay, they're both 19 degrees. And this is what's called Cassimi, when a planet is right at the same degree as the sun. And this can actually make the planets just that much more powerful, because usually whenever a planet is close to the sun, it's combust and it weakens the other planet. But when Sun and Venus are Cassimi, it actually alludes to great wealth. The downfall of having Sun Cassimi Venus could be that the relationships could be troubling for someone. But again, it usually alludes to great wealth. Okay, so we see that here, and that's, I think, a pretty big deal in this chart. Now, moving on to her moon chart, again, we see that the Sun, Venus, Cazimi, happens to be in the fifth house here. And the fifth house has to do with gambling, speculation, lottery games. And so I think that's, a prominent factor that this Cazimi is happening in the fifth house. Also, notice here, so in her chart, Rahu and Ketu are exalted. And so they gain strength here in Taurus and Ketu in Scorpio. And so this, again, from the moon chart, you see that Rahu happens to be exalted in the second house of earned income, wealth, just financial gains. So that is also a big factor here. And if you know anything about, this is a little bit deeper, but you always want to look at Rahu's dispositor since it's a shadow planet. And in this case, Rahu happens to be disposited by Venus. And what's happening with Venus? Well, again, it's Cazimi, okay, in Purva Falguni Nakshatra, again, the wealth-giving nakshatra. And in this chart, it happens to be the second lord of wealth and money. So that is something worth noting. And again, so Venus is the second lord, it's in Purva Falguni, and Sun here is the fifth lord, and it is also in Purva Falguni. So again, I think important factors to notice here. Because again, the second lord has to do with money, fifth lord has to do with the lottery games and speculation, gambling, and they're both in Purva Falguni, the wealth-giving nakshatra. Now, Venus, by being the second lord in the fifth house, is creating a wealth-giving Dana yoga. And Venus, again, the second lord, conjunct Sun, the fifth lord, is also creating another wealth-giving Dana yoga. Okay. So one is creating it by placement, the other one is creating it by conjunction. And you also see here that Sun is the fifth lord in the fifth house, so this is well placed in its own house, in its own sign. So Sun is in its own Leo sign, so it gains strength. And again, it's Cazimi. Now, those are the highlights that I wanted to mention from her rising chart and her moon chart that would give potential of great wealth or possibly a lottery win. Now, moving on to the D11 chart, and some of you may have heard me talk about the D11 chart. That's basically the divisional chart for large wealth. And I don't have a copy of it here, but just quickly what I wanted to mention from it is that Rahu happens to be in the fifth house. And again, Rahu's very much, it is the magnifier. It brings a lot of focal attention wherever it is in the chart or whichever house it's in our chart. And so here in her D11, Rahu's in the fifth house, and it, again, related to the gambling, the lottery games, speculation. And in her D11, this is where what I think is really, really cool to see, is that there's a Parivartana exchange in her D11 between Moon and Venus. And this exchange is happening in the 8th and 11th house. And this is huge because, again, when we're talking about lottery wins and just large wealth, 8th house is very much a prominent factor because it deals with other people's resources and unearned income and actual lotteries. And then 11th house is large gains and dreams and wishes. So the fact that, again, she has this Parivartana exchange, which just means that the planets are in each other's sign, okay? And this strengthens both of the planets and the houses. The fact that there's this Parivartana going on, it's a big deal between, again, the 8th and the 11th house. So Moon, 8th Lord, is in the 11th house, and Venus, the 11th Lord, is in the 8th house, okay? And lastly, what I'll mention from her D11 is that Venus also happens to be her sixth lord, and it's in the eighth house. And again, this creates another Viprit Raja Yoga, which usually indicates success through and after adversity. Okay. Now, I also lastly want to talk about the transits and the dasha that she was in during the time of the win. So she had just entered the day that she won the lottery. She was in Rahu Venus Dasha. Okay, so she had just entered in Rahu relatively, within a year or two, because Rahu is an 18-year Dasha. So she was in Rahu Venus. And this is really important because, again, if you remember looking from her moon chart, we see that Rahu is in the second house. And so this can set off, wealth and just money, right? And the thing that's I find all this very interesting, but when you really dive deep into it, but it's just amazing how, again, accurate the astrology is, and just if you know what you're looking for. And so during that time, while she was in this dasha, she was having a nodal return. And so it was an exact nodal return. So her natal Rahu, as we see here, is 3 degrees of Taurus in the second house of money, income, wealth, okay, from the moon chart. And transiting Rahu and Ketu, they always transit together. So her transiting Rahu was literally 3 degrees of Taurus, just like her natal Rahu. And so this was an exact nodal return. And whenever you're going through a nodal return, that's a pretty big transit. It's just indicative of, something big happening in the life, and just big fated karmic changes and events. And so that is worth noting. Now, again, I'll read this from, so just back to the dashas, okay? So the reason why she won in Rahu Venus is because Rahu is in the second house of money from the moon chart. And again, you look to the dispositor of Rahu, which happens to be Venus, and look again where Venus is. It's in Purva Falguni. It's in the fifth house from the moon. Again, indicative of lottery games and winnings. And so I think, again, and it's Kasimi. So this is, again, what made her win. Now, just going back to the transits, from her regular chart, I'll go over that first, the transits from her regular chart. So again, there was the nodal return there, and Jupiter was transiting the second house of income. So it was in Sagittarius here. And that's a big deal just because Jupiter is an expansive, lucky planet. It gives us opportunity and blessings. And so it was transiting the second house of money. So that's usually indicative of increase in finances. Also, on that day, Sun and Moon were together. And so that was actually creating a new moon. And it was in the second house as well. So Sun and Moon was transiting Sagittarius in her second house of wealth. Another big factor. Saturn just entered her first house, and you would normally not associate that with the lottery win, but it's that sometimes Saturn can increase responsibilities. And so, as you can imagine, if you win a big lump sum of money, there could be an increased responsibility. And Saturn gives us rewards. And so it could have just, it's just something to consider, that because Saturn just had entered her first house, it was at 0 degrees. So I think that's just worth mentioning. Now, Mercury was transiting also her first house. And this is interesting because Mercury happens to be the 8th and 11th lord in her chart. And again, it was transiting the first house. So this connects lottery wins specifically to her identity. And the 11th Lord is large gains, again, transiting her first house. So this creates a wealth-giving Dana yoga. So I could see that as, again, an event getting triggered in terms of money. And lastly, I'll say that K2 is transiting the first house, and that can be a time of lots of destined and karmic change when the nodes are in your first house or transiting your 1-7 axis. There could be a lot of change happening for you at that time. Now, just lastly, looking at her transits from the moon chart, Rahu is transiting the second house. Okay, so that's also a big deal because Rahu, again, magnifier, it gives, it tends to give us things, materialistic things, and it was in her second house of income. Jupiter was transiting her 9th house, which has to do with luck and fortune. And if you know anything about Jupiter's aspects, that means Jupiter was aspecting the 1st and 5th house, okay? And that's also positive just because, again, Jupiter is the blessings, opportunities. It was aspecting the 1st house of her identity, of her life path, and 5th house of the speculation and lottery games, okay? So this was a positive thing. Now, Saturn was transiting the 8th house, okay, from the moon. And again, I was saying how it was at 0 degrees, and it was so close within her natal K2, which was 3 degrees, which it's 3 degrees here. So it was within a really close orb. And whenever you have a transiting planet over a natal planet within a close degree orb, it could also, set off certain events in our lives. Now, again, K2 is transiting the 8th house as well. And K2 can sometimes act as a magnifier as well because it has to do with the karmic nodes. And this could have just obviously contributed to, it activated the 8th house, which is lottery gains. Okay. So again, K2 was transiting 3 degrees over her natal 3-degree K2. So it's exact. Now, just finishing up here, that Mercury was, as the 6th Lord, was transiting the 8th Lord from the moon. And again, there goes that Vipreet Raja Yoga where you can have gain success through adversities. And lastly, her Mars, as the 1st and 8th Lord, was transiting the 11th house. Okay. And again, there's a connection here between the identity, again, creating a Dana yoga by transit, and then 8th Lord of lotteries transiting the 11th house of large gains. So again, I see the connections between her lottery and large gains. So that was my analysis of, the dashas, the transits, and the static potential in her chart. If you're interested in your own personal reading, I do have those available. You can book on my website a Zoom session with me, and we can go over your potentials for wealth. Otherwise, I do have a yearly email reading that I also have available that you can look into. And like I said, I plan on doing some more lottery winners. So stay tuned for that. And if you got any value out of this, please share, subscribe, like, comment, and I'll see you in the next video.